what I want to do today is is pretty brief, actually. Mercifully, I suppose I should say. Um, I've I've been I've been trying to over the last 2 days try to begin to approach and move towards the terms of and the conditions of a friendship, which at the same time already exists. Okay, so and I want to try to not bring this, well, bring the opening of this, maybe, I guess, to a kind of close, if that makes any sense. Um, and and also what I want to do is so with that said, what I'm gonna do is something pretty close to what I did last time, um, which is simply to try to sort of begin with the last paragraph of what I was talking about last time, and move from there uh, to the sort of closing of what I sort of initiated, or had been hoping to initiate. So so the way that it kind of was supposed to work was that I had this sort of long text that had three sections, right? One called Fantasy in the Hold, and the second called Manic Depression, and the third called Like Sunny. Okay. And basically all I'm really getting through is Fantasy in the Hold. So I'll say briefly before before beginning my conclusion that a little bit about what the other two sections were sort of trying to move towards. Um, so one thing that I was attempting to do in the section called Manic Depression was to take up, and I should say, well, was to take up a kind of gesture to try to extend and to complete something which had really showed up really as a kind of gestural, um, an inadequate gesture towards a real engagement with Professor Wilderson's and Professor Sexton's work, especially. Um, and in an essay called "The Case of Blackness," I I talk about, well, I do two things that I wish. You know how you want to sort of take something back even though you still think it's true? Um, but I want to take it back because there was a kind of, as I said, and I usually don't use gestural as a denigrating term. I'm usually much more uh, interested in and hoping to provide a kind of other evaluation of something that ordinarily would be dismissed under the rubric of the merely gestural, let's say, by somebody like, by Adorno maybe, let's say. But but in this instance it was not enough, or not enough of, maybe it wasn't so much that it was merely a gesture, but not enough of a gesture. Okay. So one of the things that I did was I was trying to talk about, and what's amazing and beautiful is that in his response to this particular moment in my essay, Professor Sexton really actually carries out the full gesture in a way that I didn't do, and also actually in a way that I couldn't have done. So I was trying to think about what the relationship is between. Well, I was moving by way of an intense sort of interest in a certain moment in Black Skin, White Masks, where Fanon talks about how the one who makes the demand, right? The the figure whose revolutionary activity manifests itself in the demand is always neurotic. Okay? And I think what he's doing in that passage, in that moment, is maybe anticipating something, but anticipating a certain kind of analysis that maybe you'll get in the work of somebody like Wendy Brown, like in States of Injury. So it's this very particular kind of neurosis that there's something neurotic about making a demand upon the very structure, right? Which is in some sense dependent upon its constant suppression, right, of your very capacity to demand, right? It's not just that this structure is in a certain kind of meanness or venality, sort of predisposed not to accede to your demand, but that the structure is in fact based upon and founded on it's not just that the structure depends upon the continual refusal to accede to that demand, but the structure in fact depends upon the continual refusal of the very capacity that you might have to make a demand, right? So that there's a doubly neurotic element to this. On the one hand, you're asking a structure to do precisely that which it cannot do, okay? And on the other hand, you're also asking a structure to acknowledge, right, precisely a certain kind of speech act which it cannot acknowledge, right? It cannot acknowledge your capacity to demand, right? This is the difference between, it's something that I think, again, in Brian Wagner's phrase, shows up under the rubric of existence without standing, right? Where it's not just that the court must of necessity refuse your claim. The court, in fact, cannot even acknowledge your capacity to make the claim. And then at the same time, of course, what makes it all the more like poignant and problematic is that you are constrained continually still to make the claim, right? You have to make the claim anyway. Okay. And I think it's telling and important that Fanon talks about this as a neurosis. And I want to talk about that in this real sort of literal, kind of visceral way, as in it's the kind of thing that can drive you crazy, right? Like it's the kind of thing that can just, and you all know this. I mean, I'm not sitting here trying to tell you something that you don't already know, right? I have to, because we've all been, I think, put in this kind of position. Of course, there's at the same time a higher level of intensity and a higher level of brutality when, in fact, this position, which is in fact the absence of a position, is the position to which you are eternally relegated, right? In other words, not a temporary position that you get placed in vis-a-vis a specific claim or demand that you make upon power at a specific moment, right? But rather, this position of the non-position, the position of the one that has no standing, is the one that you are constrained eternally to occupy. Okay. Cedric Robinson talks about this under the term he uses, the eternal internal alien. Okay. So what I was trying to do in this section called Manic Depression was to try to talk about that, to talk about it specifically in relation to something else that shows up in early